Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years, senior scientist, and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. This is its sister show and covers just nutrition from a variety of angles. Come on in for your brief weekly dose of commentary, critique, and probably a comedic touch when we have co-hosts. Let's see what's on tap this time. Thinking Thursdays for lecture time. Okay, everyone, we're going to check in with the second half of the evidence lecture that we listened to on the last Thinking Thursday. It's just so important to understand what good evidence is, and in a world where a lot of gurus share their opinions, where do you get that basic foundation to understand? Enjoy.
Okay. If we move on, then there is a big figure on this slide, big white square with a yellow circle in the middle. And the yellow circle in the middle says growing confidence in the research hypothesis. So that's the idea of a theory, is that yellow circles. We've got growing confidence because all these things point to it. If we look at the top, animal studies suggest a nutrient is having a certain effect. If we go around clockwise, is it biologically plausible? Does it make sense? For example, it's biologically plausible that coffee and caffeine are going to increase alertness, right? Or maybe adrenaline or something like that. If we pan around, are there human intervention trials? If human studies are also suggesting the same thing as the animal studies and the plausibility idea, now we're really starting to build a case. If you pan around, epidemiological observations, so we get those big sweeping types of studies. They're not cause and effect, but they suggest, keep up with this coffee idea, they suggest that coffee makes you alert too. For example, coffee is the most drank beverage in the world. Well, there's a reason for that. It wakes you up every morning. And then clinical practice observations. This is where physicians, nurses, dietitians, physical therapists, they see certain effects in their practice. So all these things come together in the middle, and we have a pretty strong indication that a nutrient does something. So the slides and the textbook that we used in this class, this is where it comes from, right? That those data, that information, isn't just handed down by the nutrition gods. It was created in laboratories, just like some of the ones we have at the university. If we go to the next slide on science concepts, it's just about reporting experimental results. So where do you go look? The easiest way to do that is to go to PubMed or Medline. On the internet, just Google the term PubMed, and it's going to take you to the National Library of Medicine. That's where all the peer-reviewed, high-quality evidence studies are. There are other databases, but that's a very large and popular one. But on this slide, it says reporting experimental results. Peer-reviewed journals is where we are here. That's where we see this. These are fact-checked by other researchers of the scientist level or higher. And essentially, they're not just fact-checking, but they're looking to see, did the researcher do anything stupid? Did they forget to control for physical activity or sleep? Or was their equipment legitimate? All those sorts of things. Peer review. It's checked for quality. The very first one of these is the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, I'm a member of the ASN, the American Society of Nutrition. It's their journal, or our journal, if you will. It's the number one highest impact journal in nutrition, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Now, there are others on this list. The Journal of Applied Physiology, you'll see nutrition studies in there. You'll see things in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise. You'll see things in JAMA, right, the Journal of American Medical Association. The New England Journal of Medicine. You see nutrition studies appear in a lot of these journals, and you can see in the picture here, they're very dry. They're not colorful. They're not meant to be super entertaining. They're meant to be high quality, well-controlled, carefully concluded investigations. And they're pretty black and white oftentimes, even when they're online. Let's go to the next slide. What about nutrition advice? So other than a peer-reviewed journal, what are some of the things you might think about if you, for example, if I send you to go do a Google search on look for a YouTube video, something like that. one of the things you need to ask, number one, who said it, right? So we're going to set the bar high. Who said it? We're going to expect credentials and education out of the person who is giving nutrition advice. Are they a neutral third party, or do they have conflicts of interest? Even if you have credentials, that doesn't mean that you're not paid to hold up a bottle and say something is great, of a dietary supplement or whatnot. We have to be careful with the term nutrition experts. The third bullet on this slide is nutrition experts. And it's important to understand there is a single governing body in the U.S. That is how you become a licensed nutritionist. In nutrition, you have to have a license to give nutrition advice. If you give prescriptive assessments and nutrition advice in Ohio, you're committing a misdemeanor crime unless you have a license to practice. I mentioned in the intro, I have a license to practice nutrition. Ohio is very strict about this. In fact, they do, send out covertly sort of people to pose as customers, someone they think is practicing dietetics without a license, and you can actually get in trouble. They will then enforce their scope of practice. So Ohio is pretty strict about that. If you look on the right side of this slide, commonly recognized ways to know someone's a nutrition expert. One is to have a bachelor's or a master's degree from an accredited university, of course. The second bullet is to do an internship. So you might have to do 1,200 hours of working with patients or clients in different kinds of settings, inpatient, outpatient, WIC clinics, out in the public, research, sports nutrition. You get the idea. Internship hours. Then the third bullet's very important. You take an RD examination. Just like a lawyer might take the bar exam, you have to take the registered dietitian exam. The fourth bullet is license. And this is a really key term. License. Think L. License, law. It's not like a certificate in coaching or something like that, personal training, those sorts of things, life coach type things. L, license, legal, law. Each state has a state board, medical board or dietetics board. They enforce licensure. So only people who have a college degree and the internship hours and pass their exam get a license to practice in nutrition. Even to maintain your license, you have to have further certification and continuing education credits. So, for example, I have to maintain 75 hours worth of continuing education at workshops and conferences and seminars every 5 years. That's the idea. Now, also, I want to point out here, if you're not an RD, you can still, of course, be legitimate in nutrition. You're just not a clinical licensed nutritionist, but you could be a nutrition researcher. So those people have PhDs or MD PhDs. So they're highly educated, and they're not so much about practicing nutrition and dietetics, but doing the research, right? Oftentimes these are the food technologists, right? Your food is partly made. It's not just grown these days. So masters and PhD researchers and food technologists, food science professionals, also legitimate. If we go to the next slide, not just who said it, but where published. This should be something on your radar. Where was the information published? Was it a scientific journal that was peer-reviewed? That's our first bullet. That's the highest quality, scientific journals that are peer-reviewed. Other things on there, though, it says, what's the problem with these? So it talks about popular magazines, advertisements, newspapers, TV. The problem, if you think about that just for a moment, is that those aren't peer-reviewed. They're not checked to see if the person wasn't biased in some way or used bogus equipment or didn't wait long enough for the nutrient dose to take an effect. You get the idea. There are many, many things that are problems with those lay sources like magazines and ads and newspapers. Let's go to the next slide. Evidence. So who said it? Where did you see it? And now evidence. Evidence can take many forms. Again, we're looking for peer-reviewed scientific journals. I'm not going to expect you to highly critique published research. That's something that grad students in nutrition do, because even published studies can be critiqued. But the forms of evidence, again, this slide, number 3, evidence, that consumers are exposed to, could be a testimonial. right? It works, I swear. It could be an anecdote. My sister took this or that and supplement pill and lost all this weight, or went on this or that diet and lost all this weight. Sometimes they don't use proper experimental controls. Like we were talking about before, exercise or sleep are very important in nutrition studies because they could be a contaminating factor. Statistics can be massaged, if you will. There's an old Mark Twain quote where he says there are three kinds of lies, damn lies, and statistics. So statistics have to be done towards some kind of pursuit of truth here. Sometimes it's a single person or a small group of people or a short study duration. You get the idea. All of these things are questionable. There are problems with those forms of evidence that aren't from peer-reviewed journals. If we go to the next slide here, number 4 on our science concepts and nutrition advice is warning signs. We talk about this quite a bit in my sports nutrition class, but there are several warning signs and red flags. It could be that there's no downside to a certain diet plan or a certain supplement. There's no disadvantages. It sounds too good to be true. It probably is. Things like lose fat while you sleep. That's highly unlikely, almost impossible. They might have a bias against medical science, right? Like, why researchers are wrong. And the more you go to school, the more insulted by that you get because you start to realize how many decades of scientific evidence are behind almost every sentence in every textbook that you have. So when someone comes along and they're brash enough to say that everybody's wrong and they've got the right way to look at it, extraordinary claims like that require extraordinary evidence, and they usually don't have it. So bias against medical science can be a problem. Baffling use of medical ease, right, or scientific words, that can be a real problem because it leaves a consumer left saying, that sounds fancy, must be good. But in truth, they don't know what those terms mean. Class like what we have right now, we cover a lot of terminology, but we're not going to abuse those terms. Sometimes there's a profit motive, of course. It's a new secret blend. There's lots of issues. So as we get out of that section and we move forward, there is a slide that shows a guy in the middle eating and all these influences of why he eats. And it's not just science. Obviously, it's not just science. There's media, there's cultural influences. Yes, there is education. The more educated you are, it's going to change the way you look at certain things. Hopefully, it will affect your choices. Maybe by the end of this course, the increase in knowledge that you have will affect what you buy at the grocery store. So that's a big deal. There is a star on this slide, though, in the lower left, and it says food, flavor, texture, and appearance. Taste, right? Flavor is, in many surveys, the number one reason people eat what they do. Yes, there's financial and all these different kinds of other things that go into it, but taste is big. If you don't like how something tastes, you're probably not going to eat it. So all those things, it shows a role for science and education in what goes on your plate, right, or in your grocery basket. But science is not the only thing that influences what you eat.
The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.